Natural Features Protection Review Board. Call to order. And Jamie, can you please do a roll call for us?
Yes. Ashley.
Present.
Fuller.
Present.
Glasser. Leto.
Present.
McNellis.
Present.
Martin.
Here.
Sylvester.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I entertain a motion to excuse absent members?
So moved.
So, second.
Thank you.
If
And
you'll do a voice vote, just all in favor.
sorry, okay. And all in favor of excusing absent members?
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion passes. And can I entertain a motion to approve the present agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Support.
Okay. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All opposed? Motion passes. And can I entertain a motion to approve the minute meetings from, what was that, September 29th?
So moved.
Support.
Go Paul. Okay, and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so Jamie, that moves us on to new business.
Yeah, so our first order of business here today is holding a public hearing for a variance request for 500 Golden Drive. This is for relief from the NFP native plant standards. If you recall, the construction project at 500 Golden Drive was for an independent living facility that Heritage Communities of Kalamazoo is working on building. They had separated out and had you all review and approve their NFP site plan a couple of months ago. I think they've made it all the way through regular site plan and are approved. And what they wanted to split out separately was their garden plan, which they provided to us in their application, which is included in your agenda packet. And so I'm going to let Mark, Mr. Robinson, who's their landscape architect, kind of walk through the variances that they are requesting. So when we had originally talked and approved the site plan, the garden had some plants that they wanted to use that I know they went back and they tried to, use as many Michigan native plants as they could. And now they're asking for some relief on using some non-invasive species that provide them some of the structure and look of the garden that they're seeking for an amenity to this independent living center. So Mark, if you want to start, or I would also, if you have someone else from Heritage that wants to start out giving us an overview of the project, I'll let you guys take it over.
I'll be glad to start, but maybe I should defer to either Jay or Jean just to make sure that they may or may not want to have any kind of make any kind of statement before we get into the nuts and bolts of this.
Well, I'm happy to make a statement as usual. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. This is Jay Prince, President CEO of Heritage Community. I just want to once again thank the NFP board for having us back. Feel like we're getting to know each other here with this independent living project. Hopefully you saw some news on MLive with the groundbreaking recently. But overall, we have a really important population to Kalamazoo and the Heritage Community. This is, in my mind, a critical project, a quality of life project. We know seniors want to age with wellness, and trails and these features, I think, are really, really important to our residents. So we got a lot of landscaping here. It's a really critical to the project, and I'll turn it over to Mark and the team as they kind of walk through the various items.
Jay, thanks for the introduction. I'll try to just give an overview. There's a lot of little nuts and bolts about how many native plants we've used and the percentage of native plants. And I've sent a list along of the non-native plants and even the relative value of those from a habitat and critter standpoint and so on and so forth. But overwhelmingly, the number of plants that we've used and the type of plants that we've used fit the criteria for the NFP requirements. They are very much Michigan native. If they're not Michigan native, and there's a few of those, they're certainly native to the Midwest and the eastern part of the country. And then there are some non-natives. We're not trying to substitute non-natives for native plants. We just want to plant more, way more than we're required either particularly by the site plan review. We have far exceeded that particular requirement. And there's two basic components to what we're trying to get a variance for. One, in regard to these non-native plants, is we want just permission to be able to plant them. And a lot of them, for example, are things like hostas and hellebores and some very common ground covers. I think there's 5 or 6 trees in the whole site that are not native. So we've tried very hard to really meet not only the specific intent of your requirements, but also the spirit of it. And even when we've used non-natives, we think they're very much in keeping with diversity, non-invasiveness, nothing that could do harm, and ideally something that even contributes to the health and overall interest, aesthetic and functional interest of the project itself. The second component is much simpler. We have a requirement to screen the southern property line, and we have wanted to do so with arborvitae. It's one of the few plants we can use that is native, is not really attacked by pests nowadays, such as spruce are being attacked, and it branches low to the ground and does what we need it to do to meet that screening requirement. To be a native plant, it has to be Thuja occidentalis, or a variety of occidentalis. I know from experience, we had plenty of neighbors tell us that Thuja occidentalis with the deer population there is a very popular treat for the deer. And we would like to plant instead Thuja plicata, specifically the variety Spring Grove. Its common name is called the Western arborvitae. It's used in Michigan all the time. It, for whatever reason, is not nearly as palatable to deer as the occidentalis. They frequently leave it alone completely. So instead of having the occidentalis all trimmed up to 5 or 6 feet by the deer over time and not having a hedge, but having a bunch of lollipops, we'd prefer to plant the alternative. It is a non-native, but it's very similar in its character and habit, and it's far less prone to be chomped on by the animals. So those, in a broad sweep, those are the two basic requests. And I think perhaps my role, Jamie, is if there are specific questions about a particular plant, or why are we using this? Sometimes it was aesthetic, sometimes there just wasn't the equivalent of a native. Sometimes it was like around the parking circle in the courtyard, just sheer salt tolerance. Sometimes it was just, I needed even more variety. As Jay mentioned, we have a very expansive approach to this planting. It's not the bare minimum. It's not even a comfortable minimum. It's really rather assertive in trying to be a very rich planting. So we wanted a diversity of plants and able to accomplish that. I'll be able to answer any specific questions you might have about our intent or the specifics of the plant material in question.
Yeah, sorry, Paul, let me just quickly make mention that in your packet let me see the page here. Starting on page 10, there's a report from staff, and it does talk about what percentage roughly of the different categories of plants. So trees as one category, shrubs and vines, perennials, grasses, ferns, and sedges, and then ground cover, those 4 categories. And what percentage of the plants that are being used are native to Michigan, and then what sort of breakdown you see for native to Eastern Central US and then non-natives. And I think part of what the, we're going to let the board have some, ask some questions. We'll have time for public comment, and then we'll let you guys have a discussion. But what you're trying to get to here, or as a group make a decision on, is do you recommend this this garden plan and the variances attached to it, the different non-native plants? Is that a recommendation you're going to be making to the ZBA? Because again, the Zoning Board of Appeals has the ability to grant the variance. And then also, do you think that the request here is seeking minimum relief? And is it such that this variance would not cause substantial detriment to the public good or substantially impair the intent of the NFP ordinance? So some guidelines on kind of what decision you all are trying to get to. But yeah, it looks like we have questions. So Paul, you can go ahead and I'll mute myself.
Yeah, Mark, the different arborvitae, the west arborvitae, the what? Okay. Anyway, are they going to be the same planting, the same size?
Yes.
Take up the same, because you go out like almost 100 arborvitae. So you're going to stick with 100 and use it as a.
Yeah, we won't reduce the number at all. They actually get a little bit wider, and if you wait long enough, they'll get a little bit taller. But for all practical purposes, we could all compare notes in 20 years. And if you didn't have deer eating one of them and not the other, they would be very similar in their growth characteristic. This is, like I say, it's not quite as narrow a plant. It just so they'll actually grow together even a little thicker. But yeah, we're not changing the number of planting at all.
I have a question, Mark. I'm wondering, I'm looking at your plant list, kind of the exhausted plant list and the numbers of each that you're planting. And some of the native species are nativars. And I'm wondering if you, in your experience in general or in this project, have found it difficult to find the wild type of some of these species, or if the decisions to use nativars are more of a sort of practical or aesthetic decision?
It's primarily a practical decision first. A reasonably close second is an aesthetic perspective. And I guess a third on the practical side is, how the aesthetic qualities of the plant. If you use the raw native, can you get it in something other than a 3-gallon pot? And, you really want a 20-foot shrub or something like that. I'm sort of exaggerating to make a point, but it's a mix of practicality of people knowing what the plant is and how to maintain it. Again, we tried copiously to try to use as many natives. I mean, I've stuck some sassafras in there, and I'm having to go out and get 5-gallon plants, but I love them, but I'd really like to try them. But I wouldn't go out, for example, and get 30 of them, because it's such a risk. They transplant so difficultly and things like that. So all those kind of were weighed one by one or plant by plant as we went through. And can we find a native that really works? If not, what really works? And then we looked at, how, is there any problem with it? And if there's no problem with it, it made the list.
I have a question, and Jamie, this actually may be more a question for you because it's pertaining to the staff report on the percentages of what percentages are native and are not native. And is that just like the number of species, or is that like the coverage area? So I'm wondering if the coverage area might be a more useful percentage for us as we make a decision. I don't know if I'm making sense, but like
Yeah. And
species list, I could see like it looks great that 85% of the trees are native to Michigan, but if though it's like just one of the native species and 100 of the non-native.
I'm gonna let Mark answer that because he provided those numbers. I thought it was individual plants, but I'll let Mark.
It was individual plant, and if you really looked at coverage, I think the percentage would even go up higher because it's overwhelmingly native trees, for example. It's decisively native shrubs. Where it only gets down to 50-50 is where we use things like hosta and hellebores, which are as common as nails, and they're used around people's patios and terraces where there just wasn't equivalent for a native. But the overwhelming coverage of the entire site is native plants.
Okay, I just want to be careful that we don't, and I'm not, this is more of an overall issue, I think, for the NFP board just to consider, is that we make sure that we're not just, checking a box that, oh, we have natives because we planted one example of 10 different native species. Again, not necessarily a problem with this project. I just want to be cautious about that moving forward.
I appreciate that. And I'm not finding the exact number on just using trees as an example, but there's like 10 non-native trees and over 200 native trees.
Great.
So it's overwhelmingly what you'll see as a canopy is native. There's one Magnolia Liebneri just for some spring color. There's 3 ginkgo in the middle of the island that's going to get salted to death, and people look at it and it's growing in a confined space. And I get tired of using honey locust. So there's 3 ginkgo there, but it is overwhelmingly, the impression will be this is a native planting.
Mark, I do see a huge improvement native plant wise from the last time we talked to you. So I do appreciate the consideration you've taken. I don't think some of us native plant enthusiasts would be completely happy with anything less, but I do just want to thank you for considering our comments and making some changes to your site plan.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark. I was checking out the planting list, and none of the non-native stuff you listed, none of it I really have any issues about, but I see pachysandras on there. That's one I've personally seen kind of escape into some wild and natural areas, as well as it's identified as a invasive weed by the USDA. I guess, do you have any alternatives for that, or?
My understanding is if you see it escaping, is it's planted next to some area where it could creep and crawl by its roots, because it doesn't seed in as such. All of these are close to the building, nowhere near any of even our own rough grass areas or anything like that. They're usually separated by a turf bed of, an area of turf. So there's a defined edge to them. So one part of the answer is these aren't going to go anywhere that they could cause trouble. Secondly, I can't really think of an alternative. Vinca's a little too weak and it gets a little spotty and it gets, therefore it gets weedy. I'm not a huge fan of Pachysandra, but on one hand, you see a lot of numbers, but on the other hand, when they're planted on 12-inch centers, these are not taking up in the overall square footage of the area planted around the building. It's a very small percentage of the area. We just want it to fill in quickly and again, from a maintenance standpoint, so it sort of crowds out the competition. On the other hand, we've used things like over 1,000 native sedges. They grow much more slowly, but once they're there, they're really tough. And so we tried to use those, but I tried to use those in smaller areas because they are slow. They cost anywhere from 2 to 4 times more than the equivalent of some of these other more common ground covers. So I was also balancing cost to the project, maintenance in the long run, and just the probable level of success we could achieve with one plant or another. But I am very confident we're not planting anywhere near where these things could escape and be a problem.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ashley, you're muted, I think.
I think that what Kyle brought up was my other question, which is I was not totally familiar with a handful of the plants on there. And I was just wondering if anyone had time to get into the minutia about any others that we see issues with. Being next to the creek with the dispersal along waterways, you know.
Yeah, I had a chance to look through Michigan Invasive Species Information Network, which I think we talked about. Instead of having an exhaustive list of invasive plants, we would just reference that. And I did look at all the truly non-native ones, and none of them were listed under that pretty broad data set. So I was happy to see that. And maybe this is a point of board discussion. One other observation I had is that there are a lot of like cultivars of natives, and I checked the NFP verbiage, and that does allow for nativars. And so I think in terms of our job to interpret the NFP kind of as it's written now, there's really nothing for us to do. And I really like the diversity and the structural, looks like a really rich planting. But I think something that we should think about in the future, and maybe if we are going to make some allowances for some non-native species, might be to see if there are any availability. I'll really look into some of those nativars to see if there are any true wild type strains. There is some research out there showing that some of the nativars aren't as valuable to wildlife. So they're derived of a native species, but they might be bred for flower petals, changes the reproductive strategy of the plant, and might not produce seed for birds. Or if it changes the color of the foliage, that changes the chemical makeup, and then caterpillars might not be able to eat it, which of course is sort of the wildlife value component of the reason we recommend natives.
Yeah,
And
Mitch,
so,
and I had brought that up in other meetings, and I would like to point out that my example with the wild lupin is we only know about that being kind of a sink poison to the Karner blue because it's a federally endangered butterfly species. So there's been extensive research on that insect host plant relationship. And, you know, I think just like proceeding with caution, there's so many other species that could be doing the same to other insects, and we would just have no way of knowing. Or even problems with birds, you know, eating some of the non-native shrubs and then having diarrhea during their migration instead of absorbing the nutrients, right? So I may not have a lot of examples about these nativars impacting insects just because that's not the direction a lot of the research takes. So I don't know. I guess my thought to the board is not just particular to this project, but for other projects that come up in the future, like, is this kind of a standard that we want to set as far as the percentage of nativars versus non-native to Michigan? I don't know. I want to keep this moving along for everyone's night, but I'm just curious about if we have projects that come down the line.
I think that's in being specific to this project. It's, you know, is this request the minimum necessary? And that's something you will have to decide tonight. And you're right, it is somewhat setting a precedent since you haven't had a variance request like this come to the board yet.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead, Mark. You go.
No, you're first. Board members.
Whoa, okay. Yeah, put in context though of the footprint of the landscapes. I understand what you're saying, Ashley, but I've looked at the landscape, the way that it's laid out and stuff, and it's almost like, I would say, an aquarium, but it's really contained. So personally, I don't have a problem approving these at this point. Gosh, there's a boatload of plants in there, and but it's going to be gorgeous. It's going to be very comfortable, very beautiful, and that's what you guys are trying to get at, Mark. And I'm sorry, I missed 6523 here. Anyway,
Jay.
Jerry, yeah. So, but the way that it is, I don't see. I agree with Mark about it not not tending to escape like the Pachysandra. I mean, cripe, you got 2,000 of them in there, but still, you've got them contained in such a way, they're planted in such a way, and as long as I guess I got a question. You're going to have a full-time groundskeeper or two to take care of this place, because there's a lot of stuff there. So that it doesn't get out of hand, maintenance is going to be a well-groomed area, I'm assuming, and well looked after. I would be more concerned if it's not going to be, if it's just going to be left, well, there it is, give me my check and I'm walking away. So, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, we do all of our own grounds and maintenance. And so we have a professional landscape team that's there on a daily basis.
I was simply going to add, and I don't mean this at all, defending the project, although it's hard for the consultant to get anybody to believe that. But I took this as an opportunity to really do a lot of research on a lot of this stuff. And you always have to look up, you can look up 5 sources for everything, especially when it comes down to its wildlife value and the value of this plant versus the other. The information that you're seeking to use, and that I appreciate and I'm learning from it, increases all the time. That in turn, and that's almost at the academic and research level, and that in turn has to translate into plants that are actually available in a nursery. And then that has to translate into not a specialty nursery, but somebody who plants and grows 5,000 of them, so you can order 100 here and 100 there and 100 there. And when I look at stuff like that, you look at all those sort of sources and all those bits of information. It's fascinating. I'll give you one example, then I'll hush. But at our last meeting, we talked about the espresso version of Kentucky coffee tree and the fact that it's a seedless variety. And it sort of caught me off guard. I thought, I wonder about that. So I looked that up, and it turns out that, and I knew the seeds were poisonous, but everything that I read, every source I could find said those seeds are so poisonous to virtually all forms of wildlife that nothing eats it. So it might actually be an advantage that the seedless variety is out there. But this is how this information, sort of morphs over time as we learn more and more. And it eventually, if you push on projects like this where you're demanding to use a lot of natives, which you are, and which we did and have been trying to use a lot of them, as many as we thought we possibly could, and still make it a successful planting, that influences nursery people and the people who produce this stuff. They say, oh, there's a money opportunity, and it does make a difference. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate that you are continuing to think about this and let it evolve as the information and the actual nursery world keeps up with it.
Thanks, Mark. I'm wondering, just in light of our agenda for the evening, if anyone has any other questions for Mark, or if I could yeah, Jamie?
I was going to say we do have opportunity for public comment on the agenda.
Thank
If you want to do that before entertaining a motion.
So, yeah, do we have anyone on the Zoom or any messages for public comment regarding this variance request?
We have not received any messages at this time.
My God, my dogs. Okay, and no one on the Zoom, Jamie?
I think that we're fine. We have we have one attendee on the phone, but they should, if they want to leave a public comment, I guess I'll let that person know. On the phone, if you want to leave a public comment, you have to call 269-226-6573, and you can leave a message that will be played during public comment period. We also have citizen comments under the agenda item H. But again, if you want to make any sort of public comment, you can call and leave a recording at 226-6573. But otherwise, I think you can move along.
Okay, so I guess we will now entertain a motion to recommend to the ZBA that they grant relief from the NFP native plant standard for the garden project at, is it 5,000 Golden Drive? 500? 5 something?
500 Golden Drive? Yeah.
500 Golden Drive, thank you.
I so move with, for the record though, I don't see this as much of a precedent setting piece, because each one that we come up with like this, anybody that asks for a variance, I'm certainly open to listening to them, except it's going to be, I may decide one way in one case like this one, or if somebody else comes up with it, I may say, hey, wait a minute now, this is not going to be contained very well. You're not going to maintain it. So no, we're not going to, I'm not in favor of that. So I don't know if that makes sense to put in the minutes, but anyway, I move that we recommend to what Jamie said, or what Ashley said.
I'll second.
Okay.
Was that Kyle?
Yeah.
Kyle second.
Thank you.
And then all in favor say aye.
I'm going to have you guys do a roll call vote if you don't mind.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Colwick.
Aye, yes.
Fuller.
Aye.
Glasser is not with us today. Leto.
Aye.
McNellis.
Yes.
Martin.
Aye.
And Sylvester.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. The motion passes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you to the team. And then just so that everyone here on the call knows, the team has applied for their variance to the staff coordinator who oversees the Zoning Board of Appeals. And this project and your recommendation will go to the ZBA at their next meeting on November 12th.
Thanks for a good discussion, folks.
Yeah, Mark, I appreciate you taking our recommendations into consideration. I really do. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Oh, there's our precedent.
Okay.
All right, Jamie.
Thank you.
So does that mean we move on to the bioscrubber construction project at 1415 Harrison Street? So
Yeah,
that's the property, correct?
Yeah, so let me give a little bit of a background, and then we have Ryan Stoughton, who is an engineer with the city and overseeing this project for us. But this is a project that's being proposed and designed at the city's water reclamation plant on Harrison there, so 1415 Harrison. And I'm going to let Ryan talk about what a bioscrubber is and the rationale, or I guess the need for this construction here at the site.
All right.
But I will mention that the I was going to let you know the page number on the packet, right? So I think we're on page 18 if you want to follow along here. Nope, excuse me, I have that out of order. It's at the very end of your packet. So starting on page 23, 21. Go ahead, Ryan. Sorry about that.
Oh, not a problem. You reference a packet. I'm not seeing a packet anywhere. I just want to make sure that I stay in line with what.
Yeah, sorry. On our agenda, I attached your NFP application that you had filled out, the supplemental site plan application, and then I included the site sketch, your conceptual drawing. That's the last page.
Is that accessible anywhere to me?
I believe it was posted on the city's website, but let me just shoot you an email.
Fair enough. Yep. Sorry. This is my first time. I'm figuring out where all these resources are.
Ryan, I'll send it to you right now.
Oh, perfect. All right. Thank you.
So you can give us some background, and then this packet will be coming to you in a second.
All right.
Right, there you go.
Go into it a little bit while I'm waiting for that to come through here. So bioscrubber, it's there to treat odors and compounds that are within the air in which it's drawing in. Most typically in a wastewater environment, it's going to be hydrogen sulfide gas. It's generated from the breakdown of raw sewage and organic matter. Also, and it can be ammonias, different VOCs, mercaptans. That's what, if natural gas leaks, mercaptans is what you smell. That's what they do it, so that way you know that they're there. So a biofilter is one means and methods in which that you can scrub, if you will, those odors and odorous compounds out of the airstream. Another method which we employ here at the wastewater plant is granular activated carbon. You guys probably all know about those in your water drinking filters, right? Your Britas. We use those all over our plant for point source identified locations to withdraw, and carbon works very, very well in those instances. And we actually have those deployed here at our plant as well. However, in this instance, given the volume of air and the compounds in which we are looking at removing from that airstream, a carbon filter is just not feasible in the aspect of size, media exchange rate, and just environmentally soundness of that technology. The media would have to be changed far too often. So that kind of leads us down the path of using biology to do it. And when I say biology, it's microorganisms. So basically what you do is, not to get too far in the technical side of it, you give them an environment, AKA a big tank with lava rock. If you ever grew up with a charcoal or a gas grill, it had lava rock at the bottom. You fill it up with raw lava rock and wood chips, and you basically feed Miracle-Gro and the odorous air, and microorganisms will grow. And those microorganisms feed on the odorous compounds. So as they're metabolizing those odorous compounds, they're removing it from the airstream, and a cleaner airstream is discharged out of a stack. So that's kind of the philosophy there. And the reason to go with it is the media change out is 5 years plus. So you're not having to change out media as frequently as you would with a carbon filter. Carbon filters, usually it's 1 to 3 years. You're changing out filter media, and to get a filter media bed large enough to treat what we're trying to treat, it would be much larger of a device. And then the need for it is we have several interceptors that come into our wastewater plant. I mean, we're a 53 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plant. And given some of the recent community needs, and that we're listening to the community and their identified of odors in the community, we're trying to do our part to mitigate the odors in which we emit and that we can control within our community. So trying to be those good stewards in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And this is the first step next step of many actually, in pursuing that goal.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to walk the group through what is new and I'd like to try out for the group. I created again, this starts on page 21 of the packet. And Ryan, I just sent you an email, so you should have that packet. It's an NFP site plan review evaluation form. And I think that would kind of help. I was hoping in a snapshot, I could give you some of the information as staff sort of reviewed the project, and you can kind of see the applicable natural features and whether it kind of meets the standards, or if we need to ask more, or if the board needs to ask more questions. So the conditions on the, well, let's start here at the top of the evaluation sheet. You know, this site plan is proposing to construct 2, it looked like concrete or concrete block buildings that'll house that bioscrubber filtration equipment. And then there's certainly the underground, there's going to be some underground infrastructure that's going to have to be installed. It looked like a lot of that was through an existing parking lot, so not necessarily new ground, natural ground that's being disturbed. The applicant was able to submit the supplemental and site plan review application that we require. We have an NFP site plan drawing that's in your packet. They're in the process of getting a wetland delineation, and Ryan, I'll let you kind of point out where that is on the site plan in a minute. And then they've ordered their MNFI rare species review. So similar to how I think we did this with the 500 Golden Drive site, actually, the request here is approval of the NFP site plan conditional upon receiving that MNFI letter stating that there are no species of concern within the searchable radius. So the parcel, and then some of the conditions, right? Because these have implications in the code. The parcel is not adjacent to a preserve or a public open space. It complies with restrictions in the wellhead protection overlay. It complies with lot coverage standards, since this is a really big site. This is a huge parcel, so you're not having any, you're not having too much impervious surface in this project. The project is adjacent to water, so per the standard, they had to send public notice, and the public services folks did that. I know I'm guessing for construction, you'll have to work with our site plan folks. For erosion control is probably the only thing you'll have to have erosion control fencing, which I know will be worked out during site plan. And if you get an SESC permit with that, you're not requesting a variance, and stormwater will be approved through Eric. He's already kind of looked at stormwater stuff during site. This project you guys just finished pre-application for your site plan review.
Site plan last week, Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay. So as far as the natural features that are on the site, can you tell us a little bit about where you're getting your wetland delineation? Because mostly the way the site plan looks, it's that you're planning to, build the buildings on what looks like parking lot, and mostly, I know it's a mowed lawn up until you get some natural vegetation buffer along the creek, or it's Kalamazoo River there.
Yep. So for any of the wetland mitigation that we do on the utility side, we coordinate directly with the state of Michigan. And we have met with, what is it? It goes through the joint permit, it's called. It's Army Corps of Engineers as well as the state of Michigan staff. And we have actually met on site with the representative from the state of Michigan. Oh gosh, it's probably been 2, maybe 3 weeks ago at this point. And we conducted a site walkthrough, a site investigation, and it was determined at that time, we're still waiting on the letter, but it was determined at that time by the individual that there were no wetlands within the region that we were looking at impacting. So he was going to be drafting a letter and providing that to us. We have not received that letter yet. But we fully anticipate that letter to come through in the very near future, indicating that the state of Michigan has reviewed for wetland impact and they found no wetlands in that region.
Yeah, Ryan, were you guys just concerned about kind of the riverbank, stream bank here, and some of
Yeah, so a lot of what we do is anytime that we really try to put a shovel in the ground is we try to make sure that all of our regulatory partners are in the loop, that they've had an opportunity to look at what we're doing and kind of help steer us and guide us if we need steerance and guidance. One of those, since we are near the river, it's the joint permit. It's a state issued permit with between the state and the Army Corps of Civil Engineers within the river influence. So we try to get individuals involved with that, involved right on the front end, which in this case, we met right on site. We were able to schedule a pre-application meeting through the state, through My Waters for that. And we were able to get that through. And that's where where the state identified that there were no wetlands within that region identifiable.
And then I just shared the screen so you all can kind of see where we're talking about, where the proposal here. So there's this existing parking and then the parking lot comes back here. And then this is sort of mowed turf grass throughout, I'd say this portion. And then this is the Kalamazoo River here. And it's kind of hard to, well, and Ryan, is the property boundary for your parcel, it's somewhere down here, right? Because then this is Graphic Packaging. It's a different property owner, right?
Graphic Packaging is our property owner to the south. I am actually currently working through delineating our property line. Historically, through the years, we haven't found a true boundary survey. So at this point, we're operating off of what the city's GIS is identified, and that shows the property line there. We are also working with a surveyor to try to pull some information as well as any of our original construction documents for the plant, since our plant was originally constructed in 1955. Reviewing all of our previous construction documents to see if there's any formal or informal delineation of a property line that deviates from what our GIS might show. So we're in that process, but at this point in time, we are operating off of what the city's, what I'm going to say, official GIS is identifying.
Okay.
And you're correct. It's a property line that kind of goes at a northeasterly trajectory.
And then you guys can all see here some of the utilities that are located underground that are through the parking lot, and that's where you're planning to tap in here.
Yes, we're looking at extending existing utilities on the premise and then trenching those in within existing roadway and then through existing roadways and such. And then we will be having to allow for access, infrastructure access. You know, there's going to be equipment in there that does require maintenance. So we'll have to be able to get industrial equipment, a forklift, those kind of things in and out to be able to do the routine maintenance on the equipment.
Let me go back up here a second. So water resources, when I did, again, using City GIS as a quick and dirty measure, you were well outside of the 25-foot setback from the river. Protected trees. I didn't see any trees that would be removed in this area, but on your application, I thought maybe you had indicated that you are going to be removing trees.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yep. And yes, we sat through, or we not sat through, we attended the tree committee meeting. And
oh, okay.
So we have gone through that process and successfully gone through that process. And just kind of give you a quick summary of that. It was a delineation of a 2-for-1. So plant 2 trees for every one that is removed. And during that meeting, leading up to that meeting and through the investigation for this meeting, we identified about 10 trees that fall under what we believed our understanding of the requirements of meeting a tree. There is a lot of undergrowth through there, just, you know, poor maintenance of the utility easement, if you will, through that area. So at this, through tree committee, it was, you know, 10 trees, 2-to-1, so 20 trees planted within the region. We'll work with our city arborist to identify the type of tree and the location of the trees. So we do have to remove some just to be able to perform construction, as well as be able to provide access on all sides of the media bed that we put in, as well as the building that we construct. It's a large corner, but it's still a tight corner for constructing infrastructure.
You mentioned that it was 10 trees. Was that under the tree committee's ordinance that they said there's 10 trees that they consider? Because I don't know if I see any trees of a size that would, so this did not come to mind when I first started reviewing this project, because because this property is city owned, it has to go to our tree committee, which is a separate and different ordinance than NFP. NFP is going to be looking for, we have a specific list in the ordinance, and it's usually a lot higher diameter trees. You know, we're talking about, I think
24 inches or bigger on here.
some of the species are a little bit smaller, but I mean, down to like maybe 12 or 18 inches. They're larger than probably what tree committee is looking at.
Yes. So what we used MDOT's standard. We usually try to defer to MDOT, since a lot of what we do construct on a public utility side is within a road jurisdiction. So that's where we hold our standard from. So I believe, and Alexis is also on the line, she might be able to chime in, but I believe it was 16 inches at chest height, because I believe the standard that was used during the development of identifying, okay, how many trees and what type. It was the 10 trees. It was, I believe it was a mix of a couple silver maples, and I'm horrible at identifying trees. I think it was willows, maybe. But again, I apologize. I'm not I don't know my trees. I forgot what I did in 5th grade for that project. But so it was 10 trees, and it was chest high, and I believe it was 16-inch in diameter is what we use for tree committee. And that's kind of what we're using for identifying.
Yeah, just to chime in, the tree committee had different species, had different sizes. So we went by their list to identify those 10, but none of them were at the 24 for your guys' standard.
I just have a question about the trees. I'm not seeing a list of trees in here. Am I missing a page, or is there not tree information in here in our packet?
Yeah, I didn't know that the packet just said there were trees that would be removed. It didn't list the individual species or their diameter.
Gotcha. Okay.
Their DBH. Yeah. Is that a piece of information that you all want to make sure you could delegate that to me as staff? Like I could administratively, that's a pretty straightforward list of what species, what diameter, and just make sure that those replacement ratios match up with what the tree committee is. They might be slightly different. I don't think it would be dramatically different.
I'm happy to delegate that to you. I just want to make sure that is something we check on, since we are asking for it.
And that's how the standard is written. I think that makes sense.
I think one thing too that I'm not sure how much thought given to the replacement locations of those, but just looking at the project area, north of the proposed project area and along the river, there's some kind of open lawn and spaces that I imagine wouldn't be in the way of future infrastructural growth, and could actually kind of enhance the ability of that riverbank to, retain during flood events and things like that. It might be an appropriate location to replace some of those trees.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we were going to work with our arborist to identify the species, as well as advantageous locations to plant those species. Being an industrial site, we do have a lot of underground infrastructure that traverses through even what's green space. So the last thing I want to do is plant a tree in a spot where I knowingly will have to cut it down again in 15, 20 years because it's negatively impacting the surrounding underground infrastructure. That's the last thing that I want to do. So that's where I really want to work heavily with our arborist and identify tree types and planting locations.
Do we have any other tree questions? Because then I'm going to move on to our other natural feature standards. Okay. Protected woodlands was a no. The nothing on the site, nothing in the impacted area met the definition of a woodland. Same thing with protected slopes. I didn't see anything sloping that, you know, meets that criteria to say that there's a protected slope in the area that's being disturbed. And then the natural heritage area is our last natural feature. And again, that one is pending that MNFI rare species review.
And then is that something that a consultant does? Do you guys have a list of approved consultants?
So I believe, was it Alexis who reached out and asked about, or someone from the firm had asked about how to go about ordering the survey. So the first survey is a desktop survey that the Michigan Natural Features Inventory does to see, is there an actual sighting of a species of concern within a searchable distance of this property. They'll also, then the letter that they send back to you will say kind of what that species is, and they do kind of look at where your project is taking place. Like, you know, this is riparian, you know, it is a bumblebee that was found, sighted 90 years ago. Is that a true risk or not? But if it's a, you know, box turtle or something, they might, you know, they'll give you an indication of what's the sort of risk of impacting that kind of habitat. Ashley's going to jump in here and correct my poor explanation of this.
No, I wasn't going to correct you. I was just going to say, I think just knowing what I do about the occurrences of rare species in this general area, if your project is staying away from that riparian area that you've delineated with the black cross hatching, I think you should be pretty good, because I think the like frogs and snakes are going to be your primary rare species that are likely to occur here, and especially using the waterway in the riparian area. And I'm guessing that there's no way to do surveys for that, field surveys before the winter. So I'm guessing that there'll be some, you know, if you follow best practices for those species in the riparian area, that you guys should be good. And yeah, Jamie, there's an old rusty patch bumblebee, which is now federally listed, and American bumblebee. There's two old sightings that somebody just wrote down in the notes, Kalamazoo. So pretty much every time you do, so the bubble is the entire city plus some. So, and it's always an old record. So we don't need to, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So to simplify, sort of step one is get that letter back from MNFI. If there was any like true concern, or they feel like they couldn't give you an accurate understanding from their sort of desktop file review, then in some cases, then we require that like phase 2 on the ground physical survey. It's sounding like Ashley's experience, Ashley works for MNFI, just full disclosure, but doesn't do the searches. Yes, there would be a way to order up that like sort of on the ground survey, but it's sounding like that's not likely to come back that way from what you know, Ashley, right?
Yeah. And MNFI does the field surveys sometimes, unless the client chooses another consultant to go do those on the ground surveys.
Nope, I've actually been, the caller is actually our other engineer at the firm. He has texted saying that they already have a staff member coordinating that MNFI survey. So they're already working on it.
Do you want me to allow him to talk? I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
sorry about that. I wasn't familiar. I didn't know the number. So
his phone number.
Okay. That brings us to the end of the checklist. I thought the whole idea of the checklist is kind of to help us walk through step by step all of the natural features, allow you guys to ask questions or kind of look into the different elements of the site plan. I guess the last question is the extent that's disturbed for land, right? Do you have a replanting plan? Like, what does the site look like once you're all finished?
Yeah, to be honest with you, we haven't given much thought to that at this point, kind of in that preliminary stages.
And it doesn't look like you're disturbing a lot of ground because it's mostly in the parking lot, but I just, will it be reseeded? Like what happens? Does it go back to lawn?
Yeah, anything that's not going to be a return as a parking space for parking lot removal, that item that it's going to be seeded, top dirt seeded, grasses, that item, basically mowed lawn.
Ryan, how big is your scrubber equipment building? Is that the orange hashed footprint, or is it a smaller building than that?
Yep. So what we're looking at, and we're kind of still in that finalizing design development phase. And right now we're looking at a building structure being a footprint of roughly 30 by 60. 25 by 60 to 30 by 60 is the rough measurement. Again, those are really rough numbers. Once we know the size of the equipment that needs to be housed within the facility, that will really dictate those outer dimensions. But at this point, in comparing it to already constructed facilities of similar size and similar odorous compounds, that's what we're looking at of a building size.
Okay. So it's not going to take up that whole footprint. It's going to be, okay.
No, so you'll have a building that houses all your electrical and mechanical and your control infrastructure and all your utilities, where your meter comes in, your water meter, your electrical meter, all of that. Then ancillary to that is the actual meat and potatoes of the process, and that's your media bed. That's the red hashed area, and that's that's the concrete tank that will house the lava rock and wood chips. And just to give you a scope of scale on that, again, this is all like tentative stuff, but comparing it to existing facilities, we're looking at about a 40 by 80, 40 by 80 foot on that.
Ryan, I had a quick question. Just looking at Fish and Wildlife Service delineated wetland, it looks like you'd be far away from that in terms of the setbacks and everything. But in terms of the flood area, you guys are right on the river, so I'm sure this is something you think about a lot. And the facility is dealing with water in the first place. So, but does that have the potential for high floodwaters have any impact on your kind of design about how things are laid out? Or
Yep. So we are coordinating with the state of Michigan for a floodplain delineation. We have some historic maps where I believe they reconstructed in 2012, redelineated it, but we're working with the state of Michigan to truly, lock in the elevation for the 100-year and 500-year flood. From old record plans from our plant construction, 760.8 NGVD 29 is the 100-year flood elevation. And we are going to be constructing everything going to be outside of that, and then 3 foot above that for flood insurance mitigation. So we stay 3 foot above finished floor elevation, above a floodplain elevation, and we stay up bank from that elevation as well. Now, 760.8 converted that over to NAVD 88 is like 760.3. But we are still using that higher number. We'd rather be more conservative when it comes to design and construction. But we will identify it and delineate it with the state of Michigan through their official chains.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
And I will mention too that will be brought up in the regular site plan approval. So if you're just curious about, that's not one that we typically cover in NFP, but it is something that both the building official and some of the other public services employees will be, they check and ask about that for site plan approval.
Yep.
I have a question about the impervious coverage and stormwater. I see on the checklist, there's a reference to note 3 but I'm not seeing a note 3 on the site plan. I might be missing something.
You're looking at the aerial image that has the colors on it.
Yeah.
All right, I'm trying to find where we have note 3. All right, I'm not seeing the identity where it says C note 3.
So that is the NFP site plan checklist where there's the different.
Oh, you're on the checklist?
Yeah, so it refers to see the attached preliminary site plan note 3.
Ryan, did you guys in pre-application talk about stormwater? Because Bobby Durkee reached out and said, hey, you should talk to Eric about his thoughts on stormwater because it's NFP.
Yes, we did talk about stormwater, and they deferred us and informed us that NFP might have some different rules than what the site plan for stormwater may have. He wanted us to be aware of that, and so he just brought it to our attention. And see note 3 on preliminary site plan. Existing proposed stormwater management structures. If there's any changes, okay, that must. So any of the mark location of existing and proposed stormwater management structures and systems on site. So I can inform you what that note is referencing. So we manage all stormwater on our site. Kind of one of the benefits of being in the wastewater plant, right? So we maintain all of our stormwater on site, and that we do directly discharge to the river. We have an industrial stormwater permit, which we maintain and we fulfill. That we maintain and we keep up with the state of Michigan for the industrial stormwater sector. In this instance, the stormwater runoff will be diverted back into our plant for full treatment before discharge to the Kalamazoo River.
But there is an increase in stormwater.
What's that?
There will be an increase in stormwater on the site. Is that?
We do anticipate an increase in impervious footprint. That's unfortunately the nature of constructing industrial infrastructure. But we will be treating it fully 100% on site.
Remind me, Jamie, is that so? I know that in here we ask for a treatment volume worksheet. Is that something that
that's typically the committee here has delegated that to our stormwater engineer at the city. So that's Eric, who will, he'll definitely look at sort of the change in footprint and then additional stormwater that's generated from the site. So typically, if you're not a wastewater treatment plant and collect all of your stormwater and send it through your plant, which is, typically we keep those things very separate. Then it's, so instead of like a 2-year, 24-hour storm, I think the NFP standard is like a 10-year. So the requirement on NFP property is typically to capture more stormwater. I think the treatment standard might be the same, but volume is increased, but Eric usually handles that and has been really good about being familiar with that. The difference in stormwater standards for NFP versus our regular stormwater ordinance at the city. And so this one, it sounds like, Ryan, though, you guys are pretty much capturing 100% is how you guys do it.
Yes. Any stormwater that we discharge from our site, it falls under our industrial stormwater permit. And so we are actually working on treating all of that on site, so that way it's pre-treated before discharge to the river. So that's inherently part of what we're actually doing on our facility, is capturing it and performing full treatment on it prior to discharge. And that's any storm event that we can try to imagine and adequately design to. So we'll be capturing it. Does that answer your question, Aaron?
Yeah, I think I'm just like looking through here, it keeps referring to the see attached site plan, but then when I look at the site plan, I'm not seeing some of the things it's referring to, so I keep getting confused.
Yeah, and some of it, I mean, a lot of it's also, our first blush at it.
Right.
Do we have any more board comments or questions? Jamie, do we have any public comments?
We will just do public comments under H, citizen comments at the end of the meeting. So you're fine to go through and.
I think I have it, and then, yeah, okay, thanks. All right, so I guess time to entertain a motion to approve the natural features protection site plan for a bioscrubber construction project located at 1415 Harrison Street.
Can we add two conditions that I heard the board talk about, which was conditional upon the receipt of the MNFI letter and tree species list?
Yeah.
Correct? Those are the two conditions.
And replanting, I think that you were saying the tree committee might have different standards as far as replacement than NFP does. So just sort of marrying those two.
And administratively, I can confirm the replanting requirement. Sure. I got that in the motion.
Those two exceptions.
In the wetland delineation letter, right?
3 exceptions.
Got it.
Okay, so with the 3 exceptions Jamie just listed, can I entertain a motion to approve the natural features site plan for the 1415 Harrison Street
So
bioscrubber?
moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
I'll do a roll call, Ashley. Sorry.
Sorry, Jamie. I get excited. I think I understand Robert.
Colwick,
Aye.
Fuller,
Aye.
Leto,
Aye.
McNellis,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Sylvester.
Aye.
Approved. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. I'll follow up with those conditional elements and we'll make sure I get those in the file. That'll be great. And then, so just so the board members know, then I typically try to attend the site plan review meeting so I can answer any NFP questions or just make sure everybody's good. And then I guess there can be a situation where through site plan, something moves dramatically or there's some big change that has to happen. If it's underground infrastructure, sometimes it's found. I can just make sure to report back to the board if something changes that seems problematic. But otherwise, usually the system works pretty smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan.
I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Brian. Okay, Jamie. Now to the final new business for Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy at 3401 Nazareth Drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are we going to hear from Mitch?
Yeah, so in your packet, starting on page 18 is where you see a similar evaluation form that I filled out for Bow in the Clouds. You all are very familiar with this site. Mitch did forward me on Friday, early Friday, the application and some other, the site plan. And I sent those in an email, but I'll let Mitch, I know he doesn't have to go into detail on this project. He was, the Land Conservancy was granted a variance in, I believe it was August, for the slopes. Remember, some of the slopes were going to be encroached on a little bit. Some of the protected slopes encroached on a little bit for being able to put in a trailway to the grades they were looking for accessibility. So that was passed and approved. Just quickly on the checklist, right? The parcel is a preserve itself, used for recreational open space, open to the public. It does comply with the wellhead protection overlay. It complies with the lot coverage standards because it's vast majority is impervious or pervious. Yes, public notice was sent to landowners within 300 feet. A variance was required and granted in August, and this project has not gone to full site plan review, so stormwater requirements will be reviewed during that stage of this. Mitch, you guys haven't done your pre-application site plan yet either, have you?
We had our pre-site plan approved, and there's a
Okay.
list of items that they look through. We just haven't had our full site plan scheduled yet.
Okay, yeah, it's become a trend that sort of between pre-site plan and the full site plan approval that we have people stop at the NFP review board. So yeah, you can see all the natural features there that apply, and I put down the standards that applied, if any, and I'll let Mitch talk about the project generally, but also maybe talk a little bit about how you guys cooperate with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and sort of your equivalent to MNFI that we had talked about.
Yep. So we can either screen share, or if everybody has that that NFP map in front of them, they can just reference that if that works for everybody on your agenda. But as kind of Jamie did for the last applicant, I can just sort of go through the checklist a little bit and talk about the natural heritage component too.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay. So the first NFP standard, the feature are wetlands. We meet all wetland setbacks. There is and to kind of recap, this is a barrier-free trail, infrastructural improvement to the site. So there is a small section of the barrier-free trailway that does intersect the 25-foot buffer. It's a semi-pervious surface, and under NFP requirements, trailways are allowed in that buffer. So that meets that component. We've been issued our permit by Eagle for the bridges and the wetland work and the boardwalk, and that is good for several years. Same situation for water resources, meeting all the setbacks there. Of course, the bridges will have to intersect the water resource itself. That's all been permitted by Eagle at this point, and the buffers are shown on the map there. Trees don't apply at this site because it's considered a woodland. In terms of woodland preservation standards, we'll have to remove something like 17 individual trees. And given the size of the site and the size of the forested area on the site, the NFP standard is really easily met, and there really is no appreciable change in woodland cover overall. And the majority of those trees are box elder and Siberian elms. There are a handful of natives, I think a white pine or two, and poplar. So it meets the woodland standard. And then of course the slope standard was just something that we could not possibly meet while doing a barrier-free trail at that site. Just given the greater than 20% slopes, the whole idea behind barrier-free is to make it a very easy slope. And so by its very nature, can't meet that. So that variance was approved by ZBA, like Jamie mentioned, in August. And then the last bit, the natural heritage area. So we work with MNFI and have access to their rare species occurrence within the preserve area. There are concerns for eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, which is a federally threatened species. And there are eastern box turtle on the site. And in terms of the federally threatened species, the Massasauga, we've been working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service And we're basically signed on to something called Candidate Conservation with Associated Assurances, I think is what it's called. And it basically says that we want people to be able to do management for a species to improve the habitat. We don't want the Endangered Species Act to prevent them from doing work that would improve the habitat to essentially save the species. So there's basically a set of best management practices that anyone who signs on to it needs to go by, and thereby not having the what they call incidental take. If you damage habitat or an actual animal, that's considered incidental take. And so there are no best management practices for multi-use trails because that's not a very common thing to be doing in Massasauga habitat. So essentially what we talked about with the Fish and Wildlife Service officials are that there's sort of two major seasons for the Massasaugas. They call it active season and inactive season. We're now in the inactive season, as you might imagine. So October 15th to April 15th. And during that period, they're down at the wetland upland interface. They're actually underground. And so any major upland earth moving activities would be really unlikely to traverse the species habitat, sort of critical areas. And so by trying to, as much as possible, to do any earth moving work during the dormant season is sort of the primary method for avoiding any type of impact to that species. If we do go into the active season, we essentially will be surveying the areas for the species prior to those construction activities taking place on that day. We've also talked about, if needed, we could put up essentially silt fence, which doesn't seem like a major barrier, but for a snake or a turtle would actually prevent them from entering the construction area. And so that was sort of our creative workaround for being able to do something like this in the area. And again, there are no official MNFI occurrences. There's verbal historical records from Sister Jenny, the previous owners of the preserve, and past swim lake staff, but there's no photographs, there's no official records of that. So we're being really conservative. We hope that they're there, actually, because that's what we're doing the habitat work for. And so that's this essentially equivalent of the natural heritage review. And I think in stormwater, Jamie and I talked about this. I know that's under the purview of site plan review, but essentially since it's semi-pervious surface and given the overall size of the site, there's really no appreciable change to stormwater runoff, and it's completely surrounded by vegetated natural area, which is really, a natural stormwater absorption feature anyways, so. And I think that pretty much covers it. Happy to answer any more questions if anyone has any.
Thanks, Mitch. We're all pretty familiar with this project, but does anyone have any questions for Mitch? Okay. Jamie, is this entertain? Okay.
Yeah, you can go ahead and entertain a motion. And I don't think we have any conditions to put on this. We can do a full approval, if I do that correctly.
Yeah. Okay. So can I entertain a motion to approve the natural features protection site plan for an accessible trail construction project at 3401 Nazareth Drive?
So moved.
Okay. Aaron moved, and a support?
Second.
Okay, second. And Jamie, can you do a roll call vote?
Yes. Director Colwick. I'm sorry,
Ashley.
Colwick.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yay.
Fuller.
Aye.
Leto, I'm guessing abstains. McNellis.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Sylvester.
Aye.
Thank you all. Motion passes.
Good. Great. We're through the bulk of it. So, Jamie, any old business?
I will say that we sent out our notice letters last Wednesday, 6,200 notice letters to both property owners who will be impacted, added to, or removed from, I think there's only 2 properties being removed from the NFP overlay. And then what is it, like around 700 properties that are being added to the overlay district. And then under state statute, we also have to notice all property owners within 300 feet of a property being added. So that's where we get to 6,200 addresses if you count both physical address, and some people have a different taxpayer address. We are getting lots of inquiries, lots of questions. I think a lot of people are overall in support of it. We've certainly had a number of people either submit public comment, call, or both, saying that they don't think their property fits the definition or should be included. I don't think I've come across a property where staff would recommend that that's the case. I think that there's so far the property owners I've talked to have justifiable natural features on their site. We are having a virtual town hall tomorrow evening. That's the 28th at 6 p.m. It'll be streamed to our YouTube channel and Facebook page, and people will be able to submit comments by calling into the same call line that you see up there on the screen. And also, if folks want to type in like the chat box or the live stream on any of the live streams. Then what will happen is we're putting the map amendments and the text amendments, which are on the NFP Phase 2 website. That's imaginekalamazoo.com/projects/NFP2. And that'll all go on the Planning Commission's agenda for their next meeting, which is November 5th at 7 p.m. And then they'll get to make a formal recommendation for approval to the City Commission, and then it'll go on 2 City Commission meetings. I guess the first meeting will be a reading and a setting of the hearing, and then they'll have an actual hearing. So perhaps by the end of the year, if this all gets recommended up through the different commissions, then we would have an approved and amended map for next year. So stay tuned on that one. And I think that's all of the old business I have.
I have a question about that. So I don't know if I should talk about it now or board comments, or maybe it's time for board comments anyway.
Let's move to board comments. And Erin, how about you go?
Perfect. So I'm in the new NFP zone. My neighborhood is, and so I've gotten some questions from neighbors, and I'm wondering if it would be beneficial to come up with, I know we've talked about creating some education documents, but I'm wondering about just an extremely simple, like 1-pager, like what this means for a residential lot. Or if I poked around on the website and I didn't see anything, because I thought I remembered we had something and I couldn't find it.
Yeah, one thing that we did create this time around, which I haven't seen a lot of people reference, so I'm not sure if folks are looking at it. If you can see my screen right now with the website, right? There is an NFP Phase 2 FAQ sheet, which kind of gets at that.
Oh, I missed that. I looked around on there and I couldn't find it.
No, I think it's kind of clumped in there just with some block text. But so this is, I think it answers quite a bit of questions. So it tells you it answers the question, what's the purpose of the NFP overlay? It tells you, it gives you more information on what being mapped in the overlay district means for your parcel. How might the NFP overlay district rules affect my property? Who reviews and approves projects, which is you all, a description of what this board does. And then when will the new NFP overlay district map take effect?
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. Although I do see it's actually 2 pages by 2 lines. So
Jamie, might it be possible to move that to a more obvious location on the NFP2 website? Easier to find?
Yeah, we have Amanda Cockroft if she's still here. She's doesn't have her camera on, but Amanda's our awesome, one of our awesome website managers, and she helped create this pretty document that you saw. So yeah, Amanda, if you and I can work on somehow making that like, you know, that really obnoxious old HTML where like something might blink or be neon. No, we're not going to do that, but so, yeah, we'll do something. I agree. I had sort of forgotten about, I had done this a couple weeks ago, trying to do just that, is answer people's questions. And, you know, maybe I should have put it in the mailing, which admittedly just felt overwhelming. Our notices are not usually 6,200 people. So
yeah. Well, and maybe posting it like on the Facebook page, like whenever there's a posting about NFP, adding that in, and
yeah,
that'd be great. Well, and I'll spread it around the people that have asked me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jamie, it is an interesting point too, because I feel like the residential homeowners are almost like a different category of, you know, what would they be likely to do that would trigger NFP? And would it essentially be anything they have to apply for a building permit for, would have them go through the process to trigger that? I'm just trying to think about, would it be expanding a driveway? Would it be like tree work or doing an addition to a house? I mean,
yeah, I'm getting good at answering these questions. So technically speaking, all of the NFP rules apply to any parcel in the overlay. So if you as a homeowner wanted to remove a tree and it was technically on the protected tree list, you would have to come to the board to get that approved. Or, well, I guess you wouldn't have to necessarily go to the board. A lot of times residential type things would be done administratively through staff, but you're required to follow the rules because, you know, they are within the zoning code. I will say that the overlay district's getting really large now, and, you know, what kind of, we can talk about sort of phase 3 is trying to do more education about both the overlay district and sort of generally about how people can be better stewards of their properties. But it's a lot harder to probably enforce, but the rules are on the books. And so I think it will also help with neighbor conflicts. And if a neighbor contacts us and says, you know, I know we're in the NFP overlay district and we're having lots of tree clearing, can you come out and take a look at this? We have a zoning enforcement staff. And so, I mean, that's something we can do. We're not proactively going around and sort of inspecting, enforcing properties. So there's certainly that kind of issue, which happens throughout our zoning code. It's not unique to NFP. But technically, if the rules are in the books, all properties have to follow those. That said, you're absolutely right. When we had a property owner down by Hill and Brook neighborhood who wanted to put a new expanded garage on their home, and they had to remove a tree, which was a protected tree species. So they, when they went through permitting, they kind of went through me too. And then they were able to remove the tree. It was very close to their house. And so it kind of met the standard of, you know, impacting the existing foundation, but then they had to do tree replacement. And then I had our zoning code enforcement person, you know, check up on that once the garage was built to make sure they had replaced the trees. So that's sort of the route of administrative approval through the permitting process. That applies mostly to single family and duplex homes. Stormwater requirements no residential properties that are single family or duplexes have to like capture or treat stormwater. So that one doesn't apply. But then anything else that's done on a multifamily, so 3 or more residential units or a commercial property, then all has to go through our site plan review process. And then it would go through you all. I know we had a list. We had a discussion when this board was first formed about some of the conditions or some of the projects where you might defer and allow staff to approve a project. And one of those was cell tower co-locations. So a lot of our water towers or other infrastructure, they'll add on a new cell tower, which is sort of a utility public communication project anyway. But that was one that we do administratively. We don't bring those to the board. And we did have a really interesting one where they wanted to put, I will say this, they needed to put a generator on site and they were going to use a diesel generator, and that's not allowable within a wellhead zone. And that's how that's what the NFP rule regulate or uses. And so Eric, the stormwater engineer, was really good about working with them, and they decided to use propane instead. was a different generator unit, but they now have propane instead of a liquid fuel like diesel that could spill. And it was right along the Kalamazoo River. So that was a good way that the code was able to influence that project. But, you know, it didn't stop the project. They just picked a different fuel source. I think that as we expand to over 800 parcels in the overlay district, we should probably in the next year have a conversation. Like, let's see what your applicant review workload looks like. And are there some situations that come up that, you know, seem really straightforward that you'd allow administrative approval of, other than the cell towers right now? Nothing's come up in the last year, but we really haven't seen that many cases. So it's just something to keep in mind. I do try to go to all of the site plan approval meetings for parcels that are within the NFP district. So like with this project that Ryan presented to us, I'll go to that NFP review meeting. That was a really long answer, but.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was asking, because it just seems like, yeah, with so many more additional parcels, if anybody needs to do tree work or if there's like insurance concerns about trees falling on their houses, like that's probably not something that we need to review each individual one. But I guess it'll be kind of a trial to see what the workload is based on voluntary, you know.
And one of the things I was thinking of probably in the first, like after the first of the year, let's think about, I'd like to put together a flow chart of different project types and sort of how they might route through the city, whether that goes straight to our permitting section and the building official, or if it goes through you all, or if it can go through admin. We can kind of brainstorm and figure out what that flow looks like.
Okay.
Jamie, can we go back to the FAQ real quick? I still can't find it on the website. Do you mind like hand holding me through finding it?
Absolutely. Oh boy. So if you're at the NFP phase 2 project website right here.
Okay,
and
so it's,
so
I think I was
about
on
the virtual
main.
town hall. Yeah, so phase 2 does have its own website. Hopefully not to make it too confusing. We have this nice project timeline. And
how do I get to phase 2 if I'm at like just project/NFP?
Type a 2 at the end.
I'm just thinking for the general public though, like I'm trying to,
they
how
would
will
go,
they find
they
it?
would go to project. They probably wouldn't start at phase 2. They would just go to projects. And then as you scroll down to all of our different projects, my website's slow to load. When you go to all the different projects, you would find NFP phase 2 on here somewhere.
Yeah, Erin, every time I've found it, I just type in Kalamazoo NFP 2 and it's the first thing to pop up. But I know that's not the easiest thing to give instructions for.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what I'm getting at is like if there could be a link from phase 1, because I just Google Kalamazoo NFP, which I think
hear you. And people wouldn't know of a phase 2. I'll have Amanda look at that too. So then if you scroll down here, you'll see documents. This is the proposed text amendments first. Okay. FAQ, public comments that we received through September, and then the map.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. I was having a really hard time getting there from the main NFP page.
Yeah, I'll send Amanda a note. We will put the FAQ a little more obvious, but also put a link from phase 1 to phase 2.
Perfect. Thank you.
You guys, my computer's about ready to crash here. So Jamie, I'm going to get in touch with you. I do have a query from Oakland Drive neighborhood about a couple of properties, and I don't quite know how to answer them. So I will get with you.
Okay. Great.
And I just had one quick board comment, which was I've also had some questions from people around my neighborhood, and I do feel like that FAQ sheet will help alleviate a lot of homeowner concerns because just make it really clear for people. So do we have any other board comments?
I wonder, just a general kind of food for thought comment. It didn't occur to me kind of until prepping for this meeting, but did the native R question give anyone else kind of internal conflict? I think with how detailed and robust this landscaping plan was, and the sort of claim that it was 85% native or whatever. I saw those numbers and I felt really good. And then I saw all the nativar names. And it definitely gave me more kind of internal conflict about the value of that landscaping, as we're kind of like assuming. And the way that NFP is written, they're not doing anything they're not supposed to do other than the purely non-native species. But I wondered if that's just me, or if that happened for others, or if that's a point of discussion maybe for future.
Mitch, this does relate to the proposed text amendments to the NFP overlay ordinance. And so I will say that, and those again are on the NFP Phase 2 website, but there's three amendments that staff are proposing that I think we all sort of talked about, but maybe I didn't go into super fine detail about that particular issue. So the proposed amendment, though, because I think I have heard these sorts of conflicts by multiple people on the board, the new language, I deleted the allowance of both wild type and nativar plants. The new language is going to read that you must use Michigan native species in any landscaping required in Chapter 50, because again, it is rare that we see a landscaping plan with a thoughtful landscape architect like this, right? Typically it's your minimum. And I think also it's very reasonable to think, like, if you've got to put in 17 shrubs and 2 trees that you can pick all native, you're doing the minimum landscaping. So that will be all native. It does not explicitly allow a nativar or a cultivar of any sort. And then it says, when additional landscaping is proposed beyond the minimum requirements of Chapter 50, the NFP Review Board may allow the use of non-native, non-invasive species which have been determined not to cause adverse environmental impacts. And so then it won't have to be a separate variance just for, what if it truly is 3 trees that are serving as a screening? I want to be able to allow people to get that approval from you all directly instead of having several trips and then tying up the ZBA and things like that. I think you all have more information and knowledge about that anyway to make a more informed decision. But then you can then give that allowance if you so choose, if you feel like they're picking things that are not, totally detrimental to the spirit of or intent of the NFP. But it's not going to be like explicitly allowed under the code sort of by right.
Okay, so they kind of, the nativar and the non-native, non-invasive species would just kind of become the same category. And in that flexibility, I didn't quite follow, but if it's beyond the site requirements for landscaping, then that's when that flexibility piece comes in.
Yeah, that an applicant can ask, I'm going to have a supply problem getting X number of whatever, and then they can request that from you during just their site plan approval, and you can approve that.
And I think that's an excellent place for this board to focus its energy, is reviewing plant lists and, allowing those variances when there's a need. But I don't know, I'm happy with that change. I think I understand it.
Yeah, I think just with this one in particular, I know that it's, like he said, it's on a case by case basis. For, American elm, like, it's going to die from Dutch elm disease if you don't have a cultivar. That makes sense to me. But there were so many that it was just kind of impractical to be able to review them all. And just doing a little digging on it, it's like some varieties, based on how they select and develop the varieties, they could actually be changing like the number of chromosomes in the plant, like changing it from diploid to tetraploid, and all these different sort of unintended consequences. And I think it just sort of made me question the assumptions that we make about the benefit of using native landscaping if it's not the wild type. But
yeah,
so I think that sounds good though, as far as how that would read after the text amendments. Cool, thanks, Jamie.
I think hopefully the supply problem will become less of a problem as the demand for these native species increases as we ask this. So I think incremental change might happen. Anyways, is that it for board comments? Citizen comments, Jamie?
Yes.
Go ahead.
We have one recorded comment. Play that for you now.
Yes, this is Richard Stewart. I'm a resident of the city within the Southtown neighborhood, and we want to verify that you've added to the natural features protection list, the area between Lake and Stockbridge, just north of John Street, the undeveloped area that goes behind the houses and then up to the city yards. We're trying to get that recognized as a natural feature. It's Southtown neighborhood's last natural feature. It's our last remaining green space, natural green space, last remaining natural wildlife habitat, last remaining natural watershed. And our neighborhood plan is not being accepted by city staff as the 23rd neighborhood. There's 22 neighborhoods, but they are discriminating against us. But our neighborhood plan is that to remain protected and undeveloped because it gives some protection naturally to the flooding that, as you know, Southtown is known for. And it's just the last unprotected area, so we're trying to get it protected against predatory development that goes against our neighborhood plan. I'm hoping that you will protect it. The maps we've been forwarded have a little dot, so I can't tell if you've included I think there's 6 parcels that are within the floodplain that predatory development is attempting to work around for the wildlife, the frogs, the green space, the trees. All that is going to be destroyed if we don't protect it. So I'm hoping you will, on behalf of the Southtown Neighborhood Association, protect our last remaining wetland. Thank you.
That's the only voicemail received, Jamie.
Thank you, Joe. I will connect with Richard directly. Those parcels you all did recommend in the amended map, and those property owners have been noticed, so or sent proper notice, so they should be, ready to go and included in that recommendation. I'm also trying to be very clear. We've gotten a number of these. We had a new group that wasn't something that we had considered. It didn't come up in our mapping. I'm trying to make sure I'm setting the proper expectation of what natural features protection overlay district does and what it can't do. So I think that's also important so that people don't get really excited that a property is somehow in this overlay district and somehow means it'll never get developed.
Yeah, I definitely heard that in there too. And I've been pretty impressed by how many people submitted public comments about that one specific spot. I feel like we heard at least 4 or 5 just in our meeting, but.
Yeah, and I know a little bit about that site because that site has been assembled and looked at for an affordable housing development, and that has caused the not unusual backyard syndrome, and Richard has been one of the organizers of that. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, and I will say we did have a conversation in our department about sort of what rules when you have something like an overlay district or a zoning district in general, that it changes over time. And so this is the case for several sites throughout the city, right? If a developer, if a property owner already had an approved site plan or permits in place,
right,
those rule now, even if in a couple of months they get added to the NFP overlay district, the site plan is still, it does have a shelf life. I think it has like a 3-year expiration or something per the code. So if nothing were acted on and they had to, propose something new, then they would have to follow NFP rules. So just so you all know, that's kind of how it will play out.
Thanks, computer, for telling me I'm muted. So if that's it for the board comments, then with that, I adjourn this meeting. Natural
Thank you,
Features.
Ashley.
Thank you. Good job,
One day I'll
Ashley.
get it right, you guys. I promise.
You're
Yay.
great. You're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Ashley.
See you guys
Good night,
later.
everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you, Amanda, if you're still listening.